Welcome back. I'm with Andrew Johnson, and we're going to look at some images put out by NASA which allegedly show the remnants of the Apollo programs taken by lunar orbiter craft. In what year did you say, Andrew?
Well, what happened was in 2009 the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter was launched. It had a high resolution camera, sort of better than the previous one, and I think the original mission for this was to look for new landing sites for the new moon mission program, which was announced some years earlier. Now it's all been scrapped, and we'll mention that again later. But so Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, everyone said, oh, we're going to get these new high resolution pictures of the moon. We're going to fly over the old landing sites. We'll be able to see the craft, and that'll prove all these crazy conspiracy theories wrong. So these were images awaited with great fanfare, and finally, I think it was the 11th of August 2009. 11th of September, I think it was actually, when these came out. 2009. Yeah, it was an interesting date. Was it the 11th of November, or it's 9/11? It was 9/11 date anyway.
Yeah.
And what we see on NASA's website is the supposed picture of the Apollo 11 site, and the Apollo 11 lunar excursion module, the LEM, is shown as basically a sort of reasonable sized white blob with 3 and a bit white blobs around it. And you can see this
sort of the feet. The
feet, exactly.
Right.
Feet of the actual the landing part that they left on the moon. So basically with this,
and there's a scale on there.
There's a scale on
their image.
Correct, and they give you this figure of 200 meters. So when you look at the space between these dots, which is meant to be the feet, of the lunar excursion module's landing section, you can then work out how big this distance is, because they give you a scale. So this is what I did. I worked this out. So I found out the size of the distance between the feet, which is of the lunar module excursion, lunar excursion module, and it's 31 feet. Diagonally across.
Along the longer length, yeah. Okay.
Right. So if you plug that into the figures that NASA gives you for the size of this image, that lunar excursion module landing section should fit into a space at 7 by 7 pixels on that image. 7 by 7 pixels. That's the figure you come out with. Or maybe it'd be 8 by 8, possibly 9 by 9 or something. You could maybe a slight margin of error, something around that figure. So when I actually measured what this alleged photograph shows, and I measured the distance across, it's basically a distance of about 28 pixels.
Right.
Which means
so it's a factor of 4 too big.
Roughly, between 3 and 4, depending on how you sort of turn the image and so forth.
Right.
But
so it's completely the wrong size.
Yeah, so it's the wrong size. It's the wrong size.
And we were talking about UFOs.
We were.
And
funnily enough,
let's say I brought out an image. I had someone on the show who was eulogising about an image.
Let's say it was taken from a helicopter.
Yeah. Hey Richard, I was in my helicopter the other day and I filmed this UFO. It's phenomenal. Look at it. Look at the picture. And if they showed that, what would people say? Exactly.
If you showed that as an image of an alleged UFO that you took, and you didn't have anybody else's photograph of it to back you up, would you believe that was a metal object resting on the ground below you? Would you believe that was a real photograph? People will believe this because it's on NASA's website.
Because NASA say that is the real Apollo 11 craft, then people believe it is. Yeah, exactly. But if you look at the quality of that image and you study this, I don't know whether this will come out on the video. Well, as you say, it's a white blob, Andrew. Could be anything.
Right. And then you look at these other, and then what I tried to do is I tried to get an impression of what it should look like, and I managed to find, this isn't again a totally realistic image because we see the lunar module in orbit rather than landed, but I tried to get an impression of what we should see on that LRO image, and
by resizing it
to a 7 by 7 pixel image, or a 25 by 25 pixel image, which is the size I calculated it to be, and then I compared that with the NASA image, and there is, it just doesn't add up.
If you compare it to Google Maps or Google Earth, which a lot of people are familiar with now, it's pathetic.
It is. Now, we've got to be careful here, because I actually made a mistake with this part of the analysis originally, in that, we look at the Google Earth images, and but some of those are not from a satellite. Some of them are aerial photographs.
Right.
The ones that are lower down, the Google Earth ones. Some of them from aerial. Some of them above a certain height are from a satellite, and some are from a plane. But we do have a comparison with GeoEye, and this is something that J.R. White has done. He's another researcher that's posted quite a few videos about this. And we have a GeoEye image, which is essentially the same resolution as the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter.
Just to stop you there, Andrew, GeoEye is a satellite which goes around the Earth and takes photographs.
Correct, correct.
At a particular height or distance.
Yeah. And I mean, I think they've got their own website and stuff. I think they sell these images. I don't think this satellite is owned by NASA. I think it's privately owned by a consortium or something.
So he's compared images of Earth taken by that satellite with images taken by lunar orbiters.
Right, and I think that because the image resolution is comparable, according to the the information given by NASA.
The same level of detail.
Same level of detail. So in this particular example, we see a GeoEye image, and you can actually see a car on the road, and you can see with some, you can see it's in colour. You can see the colour of the car.
Yeah.
You can see that it's maybe got a white bonnet or a cream bonnet or something. But you can see that it's, it's an oblong shape. There's right shape for a car and everything, and you can measure it and work out the size. So why haven't we got? And there's none of these vertical grainy lines either. If you look at those LRO images, they've got these vertical lines in them for some reason, which I don't really understand what those are. So if you compare these two images,
why isn't it in colour for one?
Why isn't it in colour? Why? And the same goes with the images from Mars. Why are we still predominantly getting black and white images?
Well, we'll come on to Mars.
So, but that going back to that. So why have we got such rubbish images from LRO? The ones from GeoEye are pretty good.
So the first one that they put out, allegedly of Apollo 11, it's just a white blob, and it's completely the wrong size. It's 4 times too big.
Right.
Now, what about the other images? Because they brought out other images of the other Apollo landing sites. Right.
And in fact, on this particular slide, we've also got a couple of things. We've got, I think this is on the bottom right here. We've got the Apollo 16 lunar module, which you'll see looks different again. We've got this sort of, it looks like it's exploded. We've got this black smearing around it. And on one of the other ones that I saw, and we could dig this up as we go through it, but if you look, I think the latest images, it does look a lot better. They've actually made it look like a lunar module now. I didn't check the size of it, because that came out after I put the original presentation together. I think they did another image in 2011, around about that sort of time, possibly early 2012. And they've improved the look. It looks more like a real lunar module now.
Right.
But here we see the lunar rover parking spot on the right here. This is their label. This is what they say. We've just got this black smudge with a few white dots next to it. That according to NASA, is the lunar rover vehicle. Which, if we remind ourselves what it looked like, going back to this slide, we've got the lunar rover parking spot. And it's a black smudge.
Right.
What's that about? Right. Is that really become that? I mean, does this make any sense? It certainly doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. Why is there a black zone around what looks like this solid area in the middle? What's the black zone? Presumably it's shadow, but shadow wouldn't be cast like that. You wouldn't have thought all around it.
No.
It looks a bit strange.
It does.
So you would contend that all of those images are bogus then?
I would contend that they must be bogus, yes. Right.
I've heard 2 different stories about the Chinese images, because they are alleged to have had lunar orbiter, is that?
I believe so, yeah.
Right, so I heard initially that they'd brought out images in, I think, February 2012, but I had an email from somebody saying, well, actually, why haven't they released them for public viewing? So I'm not sure whether the Chinese images are available, but they're alleged to be extremely high definition. So maybe we can check that after the show and just put a caption on as to the status of this.
Right.
People would say, well, if China have seen them, then they're obviously there, because China represent an independent adjudicator, if you like. This is one argument that I always use as to why I'm ambivalent about it. I don't get caught up in the argument of whether we landed or not, because there was no guy with his clipboard stood there on the surface of the moon watching the thing come down, going, yep, tick, landed, tick, like they do in the National Lottery. They have a guy there with his white gloves on, an independent adjudicator. Where is the independent adjudicator in the Apollo landings? We've got NASA and NASA's word. Hey, China is the independent adjudicator. But hang on, is China independent? Which was a comment that Judy Wood made in the previous show.
Right.
Do we believe that at some level countries are actually acting independently, especially with pertaining to space, or is there some overarching agenda? There's a lot of information that Andrew has on the moon landing, so we're actually going to film a second show. I think that that there are other things that they're possibly hiding as well, concerning what is on the moon and the UFO phenomenon as well, which we'll probably talk about that next week.
All right, secret space program on the second week.
Right, let's just address some of the arguments which people claim prove that they did land on the moon with the rocket-based Apollo missions. Now, there's a radio dish was placed in Australia because the Apollo, the position of the Apollo craft wasn't always in radio contact with NASA, so they had to use a radio station on the southern hemisphere, which relayed messages. So how could they fabricate that?
Right, yeah. I mean, there's this story is told in the film The Dish, which has got Sam Neill in it, and these two guys in the outback working this dish, which made sure they had to make sure it worked to pick up the signal from the landing, and but that doesn't prove they landed, because it's very easy to put a transmitter in a space capsule and send it to the moon. I mean, if unmanned probes had landed on the moon already, such as Lunar Cod 1, the Soviet rover,
and you would agree that they landed on the moon? I
think they must have landed, unmanned probes on the moon. Right. I'm pretty sure that they went. But the manned missions, that would be a completely different kettle of fish.
And that's the other question you're talking about, communication with NASA. Mm-hmm. You've got this room full of operators looking at screens who are all monitoring different elements of the mission. They might be monitoring the astronaut's heart rate or the voltages within the cabin, and then you see them all get up and cheer and hug each other when they've allegedly landed. So, what, are they all part of the conspiracy, Andrew? Or?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. Another good question. Are all these people looking at all these screens part of it? Were they all told not to talk? To me, the most obvious thing seems to be that they did have to set up simulations for the equipment to run through all the procedures. For most of them, for the majority of them, they may be watching one or two systems, looking at the measurements coming back, the telemetry. Are they going to know whether they're watching a simulation or the real thing?
Okay, so you think the majority of them would have been duped as well, so they keep as few people into the...
Right, I think so.
Now, what about Apollo 13, I think it was, where they had a problem and they started losing oxygen in the cabin as they were coming back? Is that right? Was it Apollo 13?
No, they never got there. They had to
turn back, and they had to manufacture something which would get rid of the carbon dioxide to keep them alive, basically. And all of these scientists at NASA started scratching their heads saying, well, what's in the cabin? What can we give them to make? And they made a device which would get rid of the carbon dioxide. So do you think that's all true?
Well, I don't think Apollo 13 landed on the moon. I don't even think it went round the moon. So that again was a whole thing was stage managed. I think partly because people were losing interest in the Apollo mission, and they needed to keep its profile high enough for long enough to do what they wanted to do, which we'll perhaps talk about in the next program. But one of the things that John Lear pointed out about the Apollo 13, which I believe is correct, and again, if any of you wants to verify this and find different, then great. If we can be corrected on anything that's wrong, or I can be corrected on anything wrong. But John Lear said that if you look at the proposed time for the landing of Apollo 13 on the moon, which it never actually landed, according to the official story, it would have landed in darkness. And I've simulated this in a solar system simulator called Redshift.
Yeah.
You can you can look at the timing of the landing, and indeed it appears that it would have landed on the dark limb or very close to being in the dark. And you would not land.
They would never do that.
No, they would never be landing in the dark.
It would create immense problems for them to land in complete pitch black.
Right.
All right. Now you mentioned John Lear, and he has analysed a lot of the early images put out of the moon, as has Bill Cooper, and they actually claim there are structures on the moon, which we'll look at next week into those claims. And also, just to touch on the astronauts, because we're going to take a closer look at what some of the astronauts have said in next week's show. You contend that they are all either persuaded or mind controlled in some way to perhaps either believe that they did walk on the moon when actually they didn't.
Well, I mean, again, if you look at their behaviour, or those that have been, interviewed about this, I mean, like, a couple of them are dead, and so on. Apart from Neil Armstrong died recently, obviously. But if you look at their behaviour, it indicates that they do believe their story. But the stories are not consistent. The stories don't add up.
Right.
That's the problem.
Okay, Andrew. Well, we're going to look more into the astronauts next week, but that's all for this week. And remember, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.